Okay, hi everybody. It's good to see you. It's like being home with the family. It's fantastic.
Hold on one sec. I just totally lost the video when you did that.
Lost the video.
Okay.
I can hear you, but I
Ooh.
lost the video.
All right. Oh, I just want to remind people we're finishing the grief series tonight, and part of our tradition is to finish it with Pat doing the final talk. I'll talk more about that in a minute. I want to start off by doing a reading from the language of letting go, and I picked the one for October 12th. Kind of fits in with our topic tonight. Being gentle with ourselves during times of grief. The process of adapting to change and loss takes energy. Grief is draining, sometimes exhausting. Some people need to cocoon for transformation. In Pat Carnes' words, while going through grief. We may feel more tired than usual. Our ability to function well in other areas of our life may be reduced temporarily. It's okay to be gentle with ourselves when we're going through change and grief. Yes, we want to maintain the disciplines of recovery. But we can be compassionate with ourselves, not have to expect more from ourselves than we can deliver during this time. Not even have to expect as much from ourselves as we would normally and reasonably expect. We may need to rest more, sleep, more comfort, maybe more needy and have less to give. It's okay to allow ourselves a cocoon during times of transformation. Don't worry, if we surrender to the process, before long we will take wings and fly. God, help me accept my changed needs during times of grief, change, and loss. Okay, to bring our series to a conclusion tonight, before we start a new series for March, I want to introduce Pat Obst. Pat has been with us, I think, for about 300 years.
Oh, there's 200 this morning.
For a long period of time. She's our grief counselor at Starting Point and has done tremendous work, especially with families who have lost children, or especially children that they've lost suddenly. So Pat is really special, and I'm glad she's here to finish this series as part of our tradition. So I'm going to be quiet for once in my life and turn it over to her.
Okay. As Loretta had mentioned, we're doing this Doing Grief Well series. We're a few podcasts into it, and I figured I better explain what doing grief well means, because some people are probably thinking, what am I thinking? How can you do grief well? So I figured I want to explain that. People often ask me, when you have conversation with new people, what do you do for a living? And
Can I interrupt you just for a second? Can everyone hear her? You're all good? Okay.
People ask, what do you do for a living? We all have those conversations with new people that we meet. And when I say that I'm a grief counselor, of course, everybody says, oh, how do you do that? How do you do that every day? I say, for one, it's needed, right? We all go through loss over and over again in our lives. So the more grief counselors, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And I feel that it's a privilege for me to help people to honor their grief, and by helping them to grieve, giving them the tools and the support to do that, and for me, the privilege of watching people heal and recreate their lives is really an honor. So that's why I do what I do. So what does doing grief well really mean? Kind of has three main components. One is to allow ourselves to be present with our grief. The other is to keep ourselves open to healing, and then to maintain the hope of recreating our lives after loss. Now, it doesn't go in a specific order. Sometimes it does flow like that. Other times there's a back and forth and a mix with those. They're not really stages. They're just kind of just concepts of what we need to do in order to get to wellness. So by nurturing these aspects of our grief journey, we can heal through our pain, and move through toward wellness. But what does wellness mean? As in wellness of our bodies and our emotions and our minds. That's where we want to get to through our grief as opposed to staying stuck. So my clients kind of, chuckle at me because often I'll pull out my phone during our session and they know where I'm going. They know I'm not checking my emails. They know what I'm doing is I'm going to my thesaurus because words have meaning and words have energy. And so I took a look at what the word wellness means in the thesaurus. And I came up with 3 really good synonyms. So one is well-being. So what does well-being mean? It's a good or satisfactory condition of existence, a state characterized by health, happiness, and prosperity. Now that's where we want to get on the other side. But early on, especially in our grief, that's difficult. We struggle with the pain of the loss. That's not good or satisfactory. We don't care about our health often. We don't feel any happiness. And the emptiness that we feel seems like the opposite of prosperity, doesn't it? The color of life has kind of gone out. I often describe it as, life becomes black and white. All the color has been drained out of it. So, of course, early on, well-being can be very difficult in our grief journey. Another synonym is fitness. Good health, robustness, strength, and vigor. Well, we struggle with that in the beginning of our grief. We often don't take care of ourselves. Some people are stuffers, others are starvers when they go through a loss. I'm a stuffer. The morning after I lost my infant son, Ricky, 19 years ago, I ate a full 12-inch hoagie. So I am a stuffer. Also, we might escape and numb ourselves with substance or overworking. We lack a lot of energy and motivation. We may be weakened by, a sense of guilt and woulda, coulda, shoulda, and shame. And so that whole idea of strength and vigor and all that is very difficult early on in our loss. Wholeness is another synonym. That means complete and intact. What's the struggle here? That don't we feel incomplete when we've gone through a loss? We can feel empty. We feel broken. So all those ideas, those concepts behind wellness are very difficult early on. But the idea of doing grief well is that's kind of our goal of well-being and fitness and wholeness. So I'm going to talk about how we get there. So also some definitions of wellness. It's an approach to health that emphasizes preventing illness and prolonging life, as opposed to emphasizing treating the disease. Now, we're not able to prevent losses, right? They're going to happen in life. But we can prevent physical illness and mental and physical, we can prevent physical and mental, disease if we do grief well and we don't get stuck. If you think of, if we've got multiple losses, they can get jammed up, right? So if you look at a body of water like a pond, it doesn't have any movement. And boy, there's some gross stuff that can grow in a pond, right? All kinds of bacteria and whatnot. But if you look at a stream, it's clear and you can see to the bottom and there, because there's movement. So when we do grief well, we want to be more like a stream where there's movement. Because when we get jammed up, that's when our physical and mental health deteriorates. So we want to keep that movement going. Most importantly, wellness is the quality or state of being healthy in the body and mind, especially as a result of deliberate effort. And that's really important, deliberate effort. And that's what I call the grief work. So given this understanding, how do we then do the grief work that leads to wellness, which is the well-being, the fitness, the wholeness? one of the first things we need to do is allow ourselves to be present in our grief, not deny it, not run from it, not bury it, not stuff it, not just get over it, not dismiss it, because it won't change anything and it won't bring them back, right? So how do we do this? How do we allow ourselves to be present in our grief? We spend time with it. We acknowledge that we've lost, um, of what it is that we've lost. And there's a really good, there's a woman by the name of Dr. Joan Rosenberg, and that's a Berg with a B-E-R-G. And she has what's called the Grief Reset Protocol. If you go on YouTube and you put her name in, Dr. Joan Rosenberg grief, this will come up. So I just wanted to mention that because her process of grieving, reflecting, inquiring, extracting the healing from that, and forgiving is a good start to helping you grieve and heal. She doesn't really go into the recreating part, but that's a good tool, I think, to use. So I thought it would be helpful to give you some examples of different types of loss and the grieving, the healing, and the recreating through them. So I reflected on my story, because really these losses are part of our life story, right? They're not something that we keep in a corner and we have to say, oh, we don't want any of those. Life shouldn't have any losses. Life shouldn't have any pain. And ripping those pages out of the story of our life. They need to stay there because they're a part of us and our story. So when I was young, when I was around 12 years old, I had curvature of the spine, they discovered. And back then they used to put you in a back brace. And this was a metal back brace, went all the way up to my neck, metal bar here, metal bars in the back. Okay. Now 12 years old, you're going into teenage years. So that was really kind of my first sense of loss, in that I wasn't going to be able to be a teenager like everyone else, because, your body image and all that becomes very important during that time. And also I was losing some of my physical ability because I was a very active kid. I was a tomboy. I climbed trees and all that craziness, much to my mother's chagrin. So the grieving for me was the first 2 weeks, I guess it was, I laid on the couch. I didn't do much. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. And fortunately, my mother, was right by my side. But she also, after the 2 weeks, she said, get up and do whatever. And she allowed me to try to figure out. And that was the healing part. Like, what am I going to do with this new body, really? And the recreating part for me came when 6 months later in the spring, I went and knocked on the door of my gym teacher. And I said, can I join the track team? And instead of her saying, well, you got the brace, she said, yes. And so there I was at the first meet with this back brace on, can't move, right? Real stiff, ran like this. And I won all 4 of my races because she gave me the opportunity to recreate what my body could do. Then before my senior year, the summer before my senior year of high school, my parents got divorced. So that was another loss. My grieving through that was, I of course, had sadness and I cried with my mom and my friends, and, talked to other friends who'd been through divorce and that sort of thing. And the healing came as, for one, I continued school. I didn't drop out, or I looked for that support in other friends who had been through divorce. The recreation of my life came in that, as I went through my senior year, and the kind of the dust settled around everything, I allowed myself to engage with my father's new family. And in fact, I had a dream that I hated his new wife so much that I went blind. And so I decided right then to not hate her. And so that was part of the recreation of my life, was just being a part of a new family, who, you know, is still my family to this day. Then before my senior year in college, and something about before the senior year, uh, my mom died of cancer. I was 24. And before she died, we knew she was terminal. And so when I would drive to school, because I sort of commuted but also lived on campus, I would cry all the way there. Then I would do my schoolwork for 3 days, and then I would cry all the way home. So I did some of that pre-grieving. And then after she died, one of the things that I had done in order to just allow myself to heal was I kept going to school. I didn't drop out before my senior year at college, although I kind of wanted to, but I didn't, because I had friends around who kept encouraging me to finish. And then I recreated my life in, I actually was going to school for sociology and youth ministry, and I became a youth pastor at a large Methodist church. And I was in charge of the youth group, but I was also in charge of the youth choir, which kind of connected me to my mom because she always sang in the church choir. And so there was that recreation of my own life after that. Then I went through my own divorce years later, where I had a miscarriage and was going through divorce at the same time. So that was a loss of, due to divorce, and also the loss of a loved one. That grief, that's when I think I began to journal. And that became kind of a saving grace to me, because nobody knew what was going on, and the journal became my best friend. And so I highly recommend that as part of our grieving process. And part of the healing in that was I needed to reach out to others who kind of understood what I was going through, that weren't close to me. So I went to a support group. Now, I had to go into the city, which I wasn't familiar with. I got lost. I couldn't find my way. I almost didn't go. Then finally I found it. And it was a turning point in my life, because I only went once. But I connected with another woman there who was my age. We ended up exchanging phone numbers, became friends, and lo and behold, became more than friends. And now she's been my life partner for 29 years. And so it's when we allow ourselves to be open to healing, we do things that might lead to recreating our lives. And that's part of what happened to me. I recreated my life. She had 2 young children. I was able to sort of go into this role where I could be around young children after I just had a miscarriage. So I recreated my life, and that is still my life today. Then probably what I would call the most devastating loss of my life was the loss of my infant son, Ricky, who died due to premature birth. That took longer. And with different types of losses, depending on the type of loss, depending on the context of our lives around that, it's going to take longer than it would, because it's complicated grief, which I think I have a podcast on. So with Ricky, I took a year off from work, because I knew that I needed to get myself grounded. And I spent that time grieving, again, journaling, being with his things and his pictures, and writing poetry. But part of my healing was being involved with the March of Dimes, because I could kind of be a mom to Ricky by doing that, because March of Dimes had launched their prematurity campaign. But also with the healing, I used music, which also is a very important part. Sometimes people say, oh, I can't listen to music, it makes me sad, to which I say, then listen to it when you need to be sad, when you need to be with your sadness. I also, part of my healing was in the support of my mother-in-law, who had losses, and we sat around the kitchen table, and that's where I learned to make Italian meatballs and Italian gravy and chicken marsala and all those kinds of things. We would cry together and cook together. I painted my whole house. That was part of my therapy. And that was all part of that healing process. Then as I began to recreate my life, I adopted my son, Will, from Guatemala. And I was still involved with the March of Dimes, but it started not to fit. I often tell my clients, if they go to a support group, as long as it's helpful, keep going. But if it starts not to fit anymore, because sometimes people don't want to relive that raw first time story over and over and over again when they're further out, maybe 2 years out. So for me, I was continuing to be an ambassador for March of Dimes, but then it didn't seem to fit anymore. And I realized that I wanted to recreate my life. I wanted to finally be able to fully embrace and engage in being a mom. So that's what I did. I still support March of Dimes, but I stopped being an ambassador and fully threw myself into taking care of my son, and so who's now 17 and 6 inches taller than I am, and is a junior in high school. Hard to believe. So that was the process there with Ricky. Then lo and behold, like I said, we will have loss after loss. Right at the beginning of when I had started a program that we did at Starting Point, myself and another colleague, for a little while, called Afterwards, the Afterwards program for people who are 1 to 5 years out from a loss. I got breast cancer. Go figure. So there's that loss due to an illness or an injury. And there was a wise counselor at Starting Point who had breast cancer years before. And she said to me, she said, the grieving comes later with this. I said, oh, really? So she was right. In the beginning, I was just all about, okay, let's take care of business. I have a 7-year-old son. I am do the bilateral mastectomy, just get it out of me, and went about my business. And I had lost Ricky, so breast cancer didn't seem like that big of a deal after that kind of loss. And then about a year out, it hit me more of what I was really losing with that. And it wasn't just part of my body, but it was also, once you have, everybody knows that, there's a chance they could get cancer in their lives. But once you get it, then it's probably going to come back at some point in your life. And so I lost that security or that kind of innocence around that. And so I had to adjust to that. That was part of my grieving process, that I'm always going to have to deal with something with this breast cancer, a certain surveillance because of the implants that I have. I got lymphedema because of the lymph nodes that were taken out. So I had to adjust to that. And that was part of my grieving process. But then the recreation of my life after that loss was figuring out what I could do with my body. What can I still do? Because there's certain things I can't do. Like I can't close a window. I can't pull down that way. So I call my son, Will, come and close the window. So I do meditation. I exercise. I do the kinds of exercises that I can do, that physical therapists have taught me how to do. And so I've recreated because I was always active as a kid, right? And I couldn't be that in the way that I wanted to. But I found a way. What can I still do? And that's often what we need to do with that physical. And I think you'll hear that on the podcast. What parts of my body are still working and what can I do with them? So again, we have loss after loss and we have to learn how to process through it. Otherwise, it jams us all up. Today, I was working with a client and a concept came to me as we were talking that I thought would be really good to share tonight. Um, it's a parent who lost a son less than a year ago, and the Novocaine has worn off. And so the pain is really starting to hit. And in our talking, she had said to me, and it was a drug related death that her son died from. She said to me, you know, I used to say, where there's life, there's hope, which meant to her, you know, as long as my son is still alive, even on his darkest days, there's still hope of his recovery. And she said to me, you know, now there's no hope. And I said, we need to get back to that. And we talked about some other things and we came back to it. And I said, sometimes we need to shift our perspective. Remember, I said words mean everything, right? What has to happen, part of the shift that needs to happen, and not that it's going to happen right now because this person is still pretty early in her grief, but as she begins to heal and recreate, being able to look at that perspective as where there is life, meaning she's still alive. Others that she loves are still alive. There is hope, meaning there's hope for joy and to be able to experience. And she talked a little bit about the joy of holding you know, brand new babies that are some family members that she recently had visited. So we were able to kind of shift that concept a little bit so that there's, because it seemed like a dead end. Where there's life, there's hope. Well, he's not here anymore. There's no hope. And now we've been able to at least plant that seed. Where there's life, she is still living. Those she loves are still living. There's hope. There's hope for joy again. And that's what the recreation is about. Because if we don't allow for giving up the hope that the past could be different, if we get stuck in the unfairness and we dig our heels in, then we're going to stay a victim to it. Instead, what we need to do is process through it and come out on the other side. And that's how you do grief well. You're present with your grief. You treat it as sacred and you acknowledge what you've lost. You stay open to healing. You unlock the door. You don't have to necessarily open it yet, but you unlock it so that, and what that means is you keep a foot in life, because that's where you're going to see those opportunities for healing and for recreation, like I did when I went to the support group. And we have to maintain the hope of recreating our lives after loss. So there's a really neat concept that I came across about a year ago. Some of you may be familiar with what's called Kinsugi. I'm going to describe what that is in a moment, but if anybody's taking any notes, there's a website called akinsugilife.com. So it's akinsugilife.com. And then I'm not plugging what they sell, but they do sell some neat jewelry that's representative of this. I have some clients who really have found comfort in it. So Kintsugi it's a Japanese art of putting broken pottery pieces back together with gold paint. The metaphorical meaning is that it encourages us to see the potential for the beauty and joy again in our lives through recreating the broken pieces. It teaches us that our broken places can, if we let them, make us stronger. So I wanted to end with reading for you what on the site it actually says about what Kinsugi represents. We all get broken in one way or another in this life. It's an unavoidable part of living. If nothing else, we all get our hearts broken at one time or another, and bits of our souls get broken off as we learn to conform to the expectations of the world around us, and as we try to protect ourselves from the wounds that all lives bring. We may not get to choose what gets broken, but we do have a choice about how we handle those breaks. Sometimes we get stuck in the brokenness and never heal, rehearsing the same old stories over and over again. And that's that victim mode, digging our heels in that I was talking about. Other times, we may try to pretend that the brokenness is not there, driving it into our shadows where we act it out towards others without knowing why. And that's where, when we ignore it, we just try to push through and jump over all the hard work. It acts up, behind the scenes kind of, and that's where you find a lot of times, people might get divorced because it's insidious, and it causes us to be irritable and distant, and then or maybe we're trying to numb it with alcohol or whatever, and then it affects our relationships in a negative way. Or we can do the hard work that's required to not only heal the broken pieces, but to make those places stronger than they were before. It is then that our scars become beautiful in the way they allow us to bring healing to the world around us. And when they say world around us, that also that means our inner circle, right? Our family and our friends and that world that we live in, as well as sometimes it even impacts the greater good. Kintsugi is a wonderful metaphor for this last way of dealing with the broken places that life gives all of us. The image is as a means of honoring and supporting the repair of the broken places in all of our lives. Kintsugi living is about embracing our healing and finding the gold in our scars so that we can use that gold in aid of the healing of the world around us. So I just want to leave you with that beautiful metaphor of how we can do grief well and come through it to a place of well-being in our heart, well-being in our minds, and well-being in our relationships and our world around us. It really is possible. And when we allow ourselves to heal, to grieve, to heal, and to recreate, it allows us to face it each time it comes to us because we know that process. So I hope that's been helpful, and that's all I have.
Okay. Thanks, Pat. Your story is really special. It's a story of the entire grief process we've been talking about.
Over and over again.
Thanks, Pat. This is beautiful. I love this lady because she's been through the mill. She knows what it's all about. And that's one of the beautiful things about her as a grief counselor, because she really does know what grief is, and she knows how to be able to share it with others. And so I'm very grateful that she's part of our journey and part of our family. And so tonight, what I want to do is I want to share a prayer, both for Pat and in gratitude, but also for all of us, because I really believe deep down inside, we have to be able to give ourselves permission to be able to feel what we have to feel, go what we have to go through, and realize the fact that somehow, some way, there's always a pot of gold, as you said, at the end of the rainbow. So, that gold healing will take care of us. Let us pray. God, the God of our understanding, we come before you tonight in a very special and beautiful way. We know that all of us are going through our own transition, our own changes. There are constant adjustments we have to make to the journey of this life. We know that nothing will stay the same. It's a constant process we have to go through, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and all the aspects of our life. But God, please help us not to do it alone, to ask you for help, to ask you for guidance, to ask for direction. But also know that if we truly open our hearts and our minds to go through what we have to go through, you will send teachers into our life that will help us through this process. Know that we never have to go through anything in life alone. That's why we need each other. We need to be connected to each other. For each one of us is special and beautiful. We all have our story. We all have our broken pieces. We ask with your guidance, with your direction, you can help us put them back together again to build something stronger and more beautiful that we can share with the world around us. And so, God, we thank you in a very special way tonight for the gift of Pat, for the gift of her struggles, for the gift of what she's given to each and every one of us, and help all of us as we continue this journey of life, knowing that grief is the process of life. We also ask that we're able to go through transition, to go through change, and go through adjustment with your help, with your direction, with the help of others. We pray and we ask this every day in your name. We ask this, that you may guide us and be with us forever and ever. Amen. Now I'm going to ask that we can unmute. I'm going to ask our maestro, the other Pat, to lead us in the we version of the serenity.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God's will, not mine, be done.